artificial intelligence and intelligent user agents. The purpose of the Day One panels is to explore emerging technologies and try to predict where they will be in 20 years. The first topic panel looks at AI and intelligent user agents. Speaker bios are at futureofinterface.org/bios.
Welcome back, everyone. Lovely to see you all. And we have assembled our panel for today. Ben Shneiderman from the University of Maryland, Meredith Morris from Google, and Monica Lamb from Stanford University, three places that I find very attractive, especially for this particular panel discussion on artificial intelligence and intelligent user agents. I'm Vint Cerf. I'm from Google as well. Hello, Meredith. Good to see you. I'm in my office here in Mountain View at 1900, just FYI. So we're going to jump into the hottest topic of the day, I think, which is where is artificial intelligence and machine learning taking us? And perhaps more important, where can we get it to take us as opposed to simply being taken for a ride? So what I'd like to do in this panel first is to offer our panelists an opportunity to sort of set the stage for just a few minutes, please, like 3 minutes or so, from a perspective from your point of view about where you think artificial intelligence is taking us. So this is a framing opportunity for you. I'll interrupt if I think your rant has gone on too long. And I'm going to start with Monica from Stanford. Okay. So Monica, would you like to just give us some framing thoughts about where AI is headed, or maybe where you wish it was headed?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should introduce myself a little bit. I've been doing a lot of work in systems like high performance computing for some 30 years ago, working on stock arrays and so forth, which is of course used in machine learning. But in the last 8 years, I've been focusing on natural language because I think it is the most amazing thing that the computer is going to get its third generation of interfaces. You have keyboards, you have GUI, and now we're talking about human language, which is, of course, the way we communicate with each other. And as a background, I've been very concerned about how the technology is not available easily because it is so hard to build anything with voice. So I have been working on tools to make that easier. So for example, last year, we made 2 years ago, we created and demoed the first conversational virtual assistant with top 10 skills. We couldn't productize it, even though we can show that it is a lot easier to build because we have a team of less than 10 people. Okay, but what happened is that GPT-3 came on arrived, and now that changed everything because it has general knowledge, common sense, fluency, and the work that we have been doing is to add semantics to large language models. This combination is going to change how we're going to interface with the computer. And I believe that I think by 2030, okay, we will be able to use the computers for the things that we normally do using conversation. And as a matter of fact, it will even exceed that because there are a lot of things that cannot be done or cannot be surfaced with GUIs. And now I can talk about things that nobody has expected me to do. So the individuals can actually be scripting, if you will, the kinds of things they want the computer to do way beyond what we can do with the GUIs. So this is, I think, 2030. And going beyond that, it will do things that we did not expect the computers to do, such as, it will understand the workflow in a way that can help people with their jobs. And it would be more guiding rather than just following commands as you will with the computer. And then the next round is that we're going to get social intelligence, okay? And that means that they will be doing tasks that you have to be sensitive to what you need to do in order to do your job, such as teaching, okay, or mentoring, doing career counseling. And there are a lot of opportunities because there are lots of things that we just don't have enough manpower for. And I'm very, very optimistic about where we're going to go with AI.
Thank you so much, Monica. Wow, you triggered several things in my mind. One of them is you mentioned fluency, and I heard that as glibness because I do worry about the fluidity with which GPTs tend to speak. Sometimes somebody said they are very confident even when they're wrong. So I do worry a little bit about that. But the point about non-GUI interactions grabbed my attention immediately because I suddenly realized, as you point out, that I could have a discussion with the computer in order to figure out how to do something, not something that I could easily express by, some GUI interface. So let's come back to that. I think you triggered a very, very rich vein of discussion. Let me go to Ben Shneiderman now. Ben, you might say a little bit about yourself if you like, and then some framing remarks about where you'd like to head in this conversation.
Thank you, Vint and Greg, for putting this event together. I'm glad to see there's a good crowd out here for this lively, spirited debate and panel. And thank you, Monica, for your work over many years, but your potent opening, which gives me a good foil to respond to and push back on. What? Are you still repeating a cliched idea that's gone back, 20, 40, 60 years, that natural language is the way to interact when it's such a slow and faulty mechanism that, it can't possibly deliver the volume of information that you need to do your work as an air traffic controller, as a Bloomberg terminal user, as a medical researcher, as a medical surgeon. Visual interfaces and direct manipulation strategies have dominated the field for 40 years and will continue to do so, I believe, because it asserts the centrality of human control. And for me, the design goal and the future has always been to amplify, augment, empower, and enhance people and do what they do. Machines are different from people, and building machines that are like people is an old idea that repeats Lewis Mumford's warning about the history of technology, where the goal is to overcome the obstacle of animism, the belief that the way we should design technology should reflect human or animal forms. And once we overcome that obstacle, then we will get on to the very powerful interfaces that will provide the rapid and high density information that you can get from visual interfaces. Audio interfaces, speaking interfaces are wonderful. I use Alexa and Siri. I think they have a purpose. There's a role. It's about 5% of the effort. And I think it's, destined to remain. Maybe it'll grow slightly. But the dominance, if you look on the mobile apps, the 2 million apps in the App Store, are centralized on the direct manipulation visual interface because it's rapid, it's effective, it asserts human self-efficacy, it supports creative and rapid exploration, it ensures human responsibility, and it really is devoted to social connectedness. So for me, the grand challenge in the next years are the golden age of collaboration, the way people will work together more effectively. We'll use AI-infused super tools to give people superpowers. That's what we want. And I see a great and positive future in that design. Thank you.
Wow, this is wonderful. Thank you, Ben. Now I know I've got two panelists who are going to fight with each other. This is terrific.
With all respect, Monica.
The only thing
fight with you.
The only thing missing is virtual food that we can throw at each other. Well, Meredith, now that you're about to walk into this interesting crowd, how would you like to tell us a little about yourself and then more on this whole topic of where is AI taking us?
Sure, thanks. I'm Meredith Ringel Morris, and I help lead human-centered AI and human AI interaction efforts at Google Research. Of course, my opinions today are my own opinions on AI and not necessarily Google's. I would say my own opinions probably align more with Ben's. In fact, I think I would open by saying, two things are simultaneously true. One, I believe right now we're on, the cusp, the dawn of life-changing advances in AI. If we think ahead 20 years, we're going to kind of remember this era, 2022, 2023, as, you know, the age that spawned huge changes in all aspects of society, you know, education, the arts, journalism, the sciences, health, law, the military, crime. You know, there's going to be new ways of doing all these things. At the same time, I also think it's, while these new AI tools will create those societal changes, I actually really take issue with the anthropomorphization of these tools. I really actually don't like the term artificial intelligence. I don't believe these tools possess a human-like intelligence, nor do they need to be useful tools or to augment our skills. Even though these tools are really powerful and they're going to change all aspects of society, I don't believe they have a human-like consciousness, nor will they ever have a human-like consciousness. And I think keeping that in mind is actually really important as we discuss these powerful tools and the changes they'll bring.
So I really love your analogies here that we might be on the cusp of life-changing change. So we'll remember that, and we will look back in 2030 and ask, you know, did Meredith get that right? It sure feels like it, doesn't it? You know, one of the things that I used to laugh about when I was at ARPA was the possibility of developing a self-peeling potato, you know, that it would you know, benefit everybody. And what you were describing made me think of the phrase self-typing typewriter, which in a way is what the GPTs tend to be. They are kind of self-typing typewriters. Well, look, let's see if we can push a little further into this discussion, trying to look into, as Greg has asked us to do, further into the future. And I'd like to come back to this debate now between the oral interactions, or at least verbal interactions, that we might have, and which are facilitated by current machine learning capability, and the more direct manipulation that Ben and Meredith were pointing out. So let me come back to you, Ben, and ask you whether there are things, in your view, that you might not be able to do with direct manipulation, but which you could do in a form of collaborative conversation. So this to try to challenge your strong opinion.
I think there are some things that you can do. I find it quite impressive and wonderful that I can, in a noisy room with some music going on, I can call out and say, Alexa, you know, what's the weather? And it does speaker independent speech recognition in a noisy environment and provides a fluent answer. It's wonderful. So I'm all in favor of well-designed audio and speech interfaces. But, you know, as I say, they all have a narrow role. The idea that you could be, you know, use it as a therapist or explore ideas that you can't find a way to express visually is, you know, a potentially appealing possibility. I haven't seen that, and we don't have examples. The online therapists are, you know, a pleasant diversion, but I don't think they're serious. And take a look, here we are connecting to each other. We're using technology to have human-human communication. And in the computing world, the role of human communication has often been underestimated. Email was an afterthought, wasn't it, Vint? You know, and created. It was not the original intent, and yet the email has flourished because people want to be socially connected. And you can have excellent versions of combining these two models, such as your digital phone, which has lots of AI and machine learning algorithms for aperture, for focus, for color balance, for hand jitter reduction. Yet the user is in control. They see the graphical user interface, they compose the picture, they zoom in, and they click at their decisive moment. Similarly, you know, the long experience with the US Air Force spent 25 years and billions of dollars to find a way to put audio in the cockpit. And yet an F-16 has 17 controls on the joystick because that human connection is so rapid, so effective, and that a voice interface would be laughable in a combat environment. And so those are also special case environments. And so visual interfaces that are rapid with low latency are extremely important. But there are so many vital places where that happens, of control rooms and control centers, of operating theaters and stock market trading platforms that require that kind of high bandwidth visual interface and rapid selection. So I still see a great opportunity, and I think we can explore these multiple ways. And Vint mentioned VR as possible as well. And I think we'll find other creative ways that people explore and create new environments, rich environments with a lot of visual information surrounding us, and touchable surfaces on desks and many other devices. Handheld devices are rather remarkable. I mean, the early designers of digital cameras said, of course, it must be a voice operated. How could you have all those controls on a digital camera? That would be, by buttons and switches. Well, that's what works, because it enables the photographer to concentrate their cognitive attention on the task at hand. Speaking actually grabs your short-term and working memory. That's something I think the AI community would do well to take in. The deep research shows that it's cognitively difficult to speak while you're solving a problem. It reduces your capacity. And so the great capacity to multiplex and use interactive mechanisms of your hands and touch while you're solving a problem are what make that so effective.
So, Ben, I think that you've overemphasized the audio part of all this, because I think you could just as well be typing on a keyboard as well as having a voiced interaction. And so
sure, even slower.
So, well, perhaps, although the richness of the interactions might actually turn out to be pretty interesting. So just coming back to Monica for just a second, and to ask whether you have a counter point with regard to how we might literally engage in a collaborative way with, I know artificial intelligence is a terrible term, but with these applications that appear to have the ability to understand in some way what it is that we wrote or what it is that we said, so that we end up in having a kind of negotiated outcome. So I don't mean to put any words in Monica's mouth, but let me see what kind of response you might have to Ben's points.
Well, first of all, when I say we have voice, it doesn't mean that you don't have GUIs. Okay, I mean, we have a graphical user interface. We still have a keyboard. That's from our first generation. Okay, it is just an accumulative thing. It is not to take away what you can do if you can see, and if you have a screen in front of you, especially a big one and not a tiny little one. But there are many jobs that are easier if I can just say what I want, right? There are lots of people, I mean, people are, a lot of people are working with GUIs. So for example, when the COVID, the people have to make appointments to get their vaccination, there are lots of people who cannot get to these computers and do a GUI. They can easily talk to anybody in their language about the fact that they want an appointment. And I think that we just have to go beyond what we are used to on a computer. And another big thing that I want to talk about is that we're talking about the future. We're talking about 20 years from now, okay? It is not about the technology we have today. And if you just look at what has happened in the last 6 years in NLP, you would know that in 20 years, it is going to be dramatically different from what we see today, okay? So I want to—
if you look at what's happened in graphic user interfaces in the past 6 years, you would see how remarkably it's advanced and how improved the quality is, and where we're going in 20 years from now. That'll be a much stronger opportunity.
I would not, I'm not saying that the GUIs will advance. I am just saying that voice will advance, and in a dramatic way because of machine learning. Because
you mean machine guessing?
Well, let me address this, okay? GPT-3 or large language models have a lot of bad rep about what it fails to do. and they call it hallucination. And it is the strangest word. It is a prediction machine. What do you mean by hallucination? It is us putting a human feature, we call it hallucinating, but it is not making things up because it wants to. It is simply a prediction machine. You know exactly what it is doing and what it's supposed to do. The mistake people make is to think that GPT-3 should be used as an end-to-end system. It is not an end-to-end system because it is just a language model that predicts what the next word is. It can do remarkable things that we interpret as doing more than prediction, but it's our own fault. So let me give you an analogy of how you should think about GPT-3. If you look at our brain, neuroscience literature, and you will see that in our brain, we have a language center called Broca's area, which generates language, okay? And as it turns out that this is only a language center. The executive functions are provided by the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the one that provides inhibition, attention, planning, long-term memory, external interfaces. And what they have found is that if you have a human who has a damaged prefrontal cortex, it would just make perfect sentences. The sentences are perfect. It is kind of like it's part of what you expect out of the conversation, but it may not be truthful. It may not be appropriate for the conversation, and that is because it is lacking the prefrontal cortex. So what we are doing is to say we have to wrap this. So to me, GPT-3 is like a Broca's area. It knows language, statistical language. And it is actually a pretty good one because it has read many, many, many bytes of words in the internet. However, it is really the prefrontal cortex that controls what it says. So, what we have been doing in our group is to do semantics, is to bind semantics or ground natural language with semantics. Okay, when you say open the garage door, I open the garage door for you. That means I know what you are saying. Okay, and you have to do the grounding. One of the things that we are working on, which is pretty far along, is that we're going to ground GPT-3 with the wiki data information, 10 billion facts that humans have put in. Okay, it is not something that kids know by growing, by just as they grow up. It's like 25,000 plus people who contributed to create this knowledge base. And what we need to do is to ground the GPT-3 so that when it talks, it is actually leveraging up-to-date information that is provided in the databases. So that's the basic idea, is that you don't use it as is, don't complain about where it is today because we're not using it properly. Okay, so we wrap it and we actually put programming control over it. The executive functions can actually be provided by computer science for developers. And the next round, we're going to get more and more non-technical people to be able to supply the semantics in such a way, bind them in terms of what, how things are supposed to be done, the workflow, and so forth. And that's why I said what I did in the opening statement.
So I could tell that Ben is elevating out of his seat, but I want to give Meredith a chance to respond. Just one point to be made here, and that when you use the term executive function, oh, by the way, people, you can't see me. My camera seems to be on, but apparently it's not delivering video to the system. In a moment, I will log off and log back on, and hopefully I'll be back with you. But in the meantime, just to get this conversation going, the idea of a system that has a model of the real world, has a model and understanding, use that word, of intent, is what I translate Monica's executive function into. And that's what's missing from a lot of the current machine learning language models, because it only has this statistical ability to produce relatively good quality speech or text. So, so Meredith, I wanted to see how you reacted to those things. And then I think, Ben, I want to acknowledge your obvious reaction to what Monica was saying and see where you want to take us. So Meredith, please go ahead. I will disappear momentarily and hopefully I will return.
Sure, thanks. So I think Monica's comment about Wikipedia was actually really interesting and relevant. So just over 20 years ago, this would be 2001 or 2002, when I was a student at Stanford, I remember I heard a talk by Jimmy Wales, who at the time was explaining to this audience of students his idea for Wikipedia, right? This was a brand new idea. He was going to make Wikipedia. And I remember being in the audience thinking, this is stupid, right? Like, this will never work. And of course, part of the argument at the time was, people make mistakes, right, when entering facts into something like Wikipedia, whether unintentional mistakes or active acts of vandalism and disinformation. But of course, now, 20 years later, Wikipedia, though it has imperfections, is an amazing resource, right, that has changed the way all of us learn and find information. And so I actually think it's a great analogy for thinking about today's AI systems and how to improve them and how they will change 20 years from now. And I think one of the important things, a couple important things that we could learn from Wikipedia's success and what helped make it something we can reasonably trust, right? One is that, the ability to understand the provenance of information in Wikipedia. And right now, current large language systems don't do a great job with attribution and provenance and explainability. And so that's something where we're going to see research is going to be super important in those areas in the next few years in order to make those systems more interpretable and trustworthy by end users. I think another important aspect that's made Wikipedia what it is in society is that people have been educated, right, to learn how to have a mental model of the internet and what's on the internet and what is and isn't trustworthy, with various extensive success. When I was a kid and I was in school, we had library class where we learned how to use the Dewey Decimal System. My kids in school, library class is learning about how to have a mental model of, web search and Wikipedia and the internet and what to be skeptical of and why. And I think, again, if we think of the kids in school 10, 20 years from now, they're going to have to learn something I'd call AI thinking, kind of modeling off of Jeanette Wing's computational thinking, right? Is that we are going to have to find a way to teach a mental model of how to interpret the output of AI systems. And that mental model is going to need to be supplemented by interfaces and interaction techniques that support attribution and explainability.
Can I just have a quick follow-up on this? So I don't want to use GPT-3 as an end-to-end system. You're not dealing with a statistical system. You have to have oversight outside of this neural model. In the first round, it's all going to be under programmer's control, just like we control the GUI interfaces. So when GPT-3 spits out a sentence, we fact check it. We look it up in Wikipedia. We have to make sure that this is right. And then we're using GPT-3. It's just to return the content that we want to provide to the end user in better language. Okay. And they can provide this information in a much more fluent way. So, we just cannot use your Broca's area in the brain in a way that it is not intended to, because you make a lot of mistakes if you don't have your prefrontal cortex working.
I like that. Ben, you've been patient. Would you like to react now?
No,
Sorry?
that's fine. I support Meredith's approach to this. I'll go even further. Us radical youngsters, I know these views are minority ones, but I think they'll come to be stronger. I think it's coming to be understood that the AI systems are structured in a way that misleads designers and developers. I mean, I'm just reading from a wonderful report by some of our top thinkers, Michael Jordan, Darren Acemoglu, and so on. AI is currently funded, constructed, and concentrated is misdirecting technological resources towards unproductive and dangerous outcomes. It's driven by wasteful imitation of human comparative advantages and a confused vision of autonomous intelligence, leading it towards inefficient and harmful centralized architectures. And what Meredith described with Wikipedia is a crowdsourced, decentralized approach. It's remarkable. I've twice attended the Wikimania conference, and it's very inspiring to see these thousands of young people really devoted to this idea of building a social system that enables the construction of a huge and powerful resource with high quality information, imperfections included, but they get cleaned up. And in spite of 10% of all edits are vandalism, they get cleaned up within a minute or two. There's such a strong force, and understanding the way we want to create this golden age of collaboration, what the next 10 Wikipedias will be like, how we will create the crowdsourced and community efforts that resolve disputes and make for better communities and enable people to collaborate more effectively within families, within communities, within companies, within societies. That's what we have to look to. And part of that, of course, will be to treat the current wave of misinformation, disinformation propagated by so many of these autonomous systems that are so pernicious. And I hope Vint and Monica and Meredith will push forward to promote that a central issue is to address the harmful effects of this misinformation and the spread of mistruths and the decline of our trust in each other. And I think we should look to a time when we talk about, again, the idea of predictable, controllable, and comprehensible systems, that people feel that they're getting what they want done. Thank you.
So thank you, Ben. I want to explain to everybody that because I had to log off and log back in again to get my video to work, literally everything that was in chat and everything that was in the Q&A evaporated. This is a side effect of Zoom, apparently, which is unfortunate, but that means many of the questions you asked are not visible to me. Greg says he's going to try to help recover from that. I want to come back to a couple of specific questions as we think about these interfaces. One thing I want to emphasize is the importance of provenance that Meredith brought up. Understanding where something came from is really important, and it may be one of the most important ways in which we can evaluate information that we get from these online sources, and that addresses in part what Ben was saying about the validity of what we're seeing. The computational thinking point that Meredith made also is important because we want people to think critically about what they see, what they hear from all media, not just from the online ones. I want to get to a couple of very specific things because we're talking about user interfaces here. And we know that some people are not literate. And so when I speak to my colleagues in India, they say that only a small fraction, like 10 or 15% of their citizens speak English, and therefore they need interfaces that work in other languages. And in some cases, they may not be literally literate in the sense of reading, and therefore oral interactions are more convenient for them, even though, Ben, as you point out, they may be less swift in many ways. So how good are we at doing language understanding, recognition? Let me use the word recognition, and I'm not sure who to turn that question to, but are we doing well in terms of language, breadth of language that we can recognize?
I think it's a matter of resources. We have, for example, there is a project at Stanford where we show that if you just give the ability for the African, they worked with this African community, and they cannot read, like you said, but they were just doing a minimal amount that allows them to say, call so-and-so in their native language. Now they can use their phone, okay? And it is really just a matter of putting resources into helping these people. And I think that it is really, really important. And Voice has this opportunity to really reach everybody on Earth.
How do we do, let's stay on this topic for a second, Monica. What about speech, which is in any language, but which is impaired? So, deaf speech is different in many ways, especially for people who were born deaf, or people who have cerebral palsy, for example, have speech impediments. How well are we able to train these systems to recognize that kind of speech? Oh,
I think
Meredith has her
this
hand
is-
up, so maybe we should go to her for
Sure,
that.
I can address that question a bit. For example, so Google actually has a project called Project Euphonia, which is specifically looking at this issue of collecting data samples from people with atypical speech, often people with disabilities, in order to be able to train either general purpose or personalized recognizers. And so there's actually a lot of advances in this area. But I think that this points both this issue and the question of other low resource languages, such as in parts of the developing world, points to a greater issue, which is around data, right? All of today's modern ML systems require large amounts of training data in order to be successful. And one thing that I think is really interesting to think about in the next 10, 20 years is how societal attitudes towards data and privacy and data rights may change. There's a trade-off to be made in terms of giving up certain amounts of data versus the potential benefits one could have from the AI and potential harms one could have from having data out there. So I think we might see new models of data ownership or data compensation, new kinds of laws around data rights, potentially, startups that generate or mine data as a huge business area, new categories of data crimes. I think data and the way we think about it will really change in the next decade.
So thank you, Meredith. I'm looking at lots of questions here. And so let me see if I can't pick up some of them. There's a question from Lowell Christie. I won't read the whole thing. It's in the chat for those of you who have access to the chat. But the basic point here is that we haven't addressed learning except for learning the protocol of the, how to interact with a device. And I'm sitting here wondering, the question is about how interfaces will allow change of dysfunctional social and cultural paradigms beyond stimulus response behavioral thinking via a new generation of interactive learning facilitated learning environments. Okay, I'm not going to try to translate that because I had a lot of trouble understanding what was meant, but I think the point here is how do we use these systems and the interfaces so that both the system learns and we learn in some very natural way how to interact with the system. Where does learning show up in all of this? One of the things I've noticed is that a lot of these natural language interaction systems don't learn anything on the fly. They've been trained, but you can't get them to learn anything new on the fly. Is that actually true, or do we have examples of systems that learn while we're interacting with them? Can we correct them? Can we teach them?
I'll
Ben?
speak up for my colleague, Hernisa Kokori, who I think is on here, whose work was about teaching machine learning systems and providing a way for humans to control and direct the machine learning in very practical and effective ways. But I think, the question, certainly we've gone way beyond behavioralist approach and stimulus response. And I think the success of the human-computer interaction community, it's a modest group of researchers, has been because their evidence-based results from controlled empirical studies fed into the design of guidelines, which then led to the tools that millions of developers used so that billions of people could use the online systems and e-commerce and mobile devices. And the strategy is if you have a good design and you standardize it and you make a certain pattern that's recognizable and that OK and cancel are always the same shape, size, and position, and you use the same terminology, then people reduce the need for learning, and these become familiar controls even in new environments. And so those Apple and Microsoft guidelines documents for human interfaces, and particularly Google's recent one, the PAIR guidelines book, Fernando Viegas and Martin Wattenberg leading that effort, were great contributions to greater clarity of building comprehensible, predictable, and understandable systems. I want to tie that to a particular point that's come up here that Vince mentioned, and Mary also talked about that her child is learning how to recognize and validate the messages that come from AI-based systems. Well, that's fine. I'm all supportive of that. But it's really up to the companies, the Googles and the Facebooks, to actually make better control. Vint may tell the story better, but 12 or 15 years ago, Google was challenged with its search engine because of the large number of scamming efforts to misdirect the search engines towards certain pages. And Google hired, I understood, 3,000 people to clean this up so that their search was reliable, safe, and trustworthy. And it gave strong results that people could trust. And that effort was in the competitive advantage of Google. And I think we need the same kind of attention that the Googles and Facebooks and other large tech companies need to be the source of validation. They need to prevent the problems. The so-called guardrails being put into GPT are a good start, but there's certainly so much more to be done of watermarks and codes and other ways that you can identify the source of ChatGPT's work, and also ways that Google, Facebook, and others OpenAI need to do much more to ensure that the quality of the work is more trustable. It'll never be perfect, I know that, but we want it to be safer and more reliable.
Well, I think, Ben, that Meredith said something that I want to reiterate. She mentioned provenance and attribution as a really important component in all of this. And I think we need to be able to identify sources of information and to provide a sufficient amount of information that lets people validate or not what they're seeing and hearing. So my guess is that if we're trying to look 20 years into the future, our ability to label information as to source and maybe even label as to quality might turn out to be a very important part of our journey towards better user interfaces. Monica has her hand up. Yes, please.
Yeah, I totally agree that in the next round, being able to learn is very important to machine learning. And we have to put the human in the loop. But when we put them in the loop, we don't just say, you just have to give me a lot of samples. You have to be smart about taking every bit of information that the user gives you and amplify it so that you can learn quickly. So, for example, let's take the Wikidata case. Obviously, that was a huge success from a collaborative point. It's really collaborative work. But imagine, right, all this information in Wikidata to be accessible by conversation. There are 10 billion facts in Wikidata. And who can write those Sparkle queries? It was just totally ridiculous to expect anybody to be able to access the database easily. So what we are doing, what we believe in, is that we're going to automate this process of binding natural language into the database. But there is still a lot of work to do. So we want to create a GUI environment, as a matter of fact, to help users supply information in a way that we can amplify by synthesizing more training data. So this is a way for us to engage the collaborators who are already on Wikidata to say, look, see if you can retrieve your information using natural language. If not, here is something that you can do. Okay, and then you can improve the connection between natural language to this amazing database that we have. The second point that I want to make is provenance. And that is that the problem today is that the natural language control is in the hands of a few companies. So what we're doing, all the work we're doing is open source. We're going to put out a conversational bot that allows you to talk about information in Wikidata. We are using GPT-3, but hopefully we can, in the future, there will be open source large language models that we can substitute with it so that it is kind of like more competition is always better. And the whole point here is that we want to show how a lot of people can apply this technique and solve a lot of problems in a way that large companies may not want to. We will be very explicit. Our chatbot is Wikidata. It's based on Wikidata. I am telling you where it is coming from. But more importantly, I put the technology in the hands of other people to do social good.
Meredith has her hand up, and I wanted to just pause for 1 second and suggest a behavioral thing that I have observed, certainly in myself. Frequently don't know how to do something, and I find myself, in my case, going to Google for obvious reasons, saying, how do I do X? Mm-hmm. And amazingly, I'm directed to a YouTube video that shows me how to do X, or I get a text explanation for how to get a particular application to do what I want it to do. And that's an example of a very generalized interface of the form, I want to do something, can the system help me do it, show me how to do it, or do it on its own. Meredith, was that a legacy hand that you just took down?
Oh, well, were you finishing your question?
Yeah, I'm done with I was making an observation, and yeah. I thought I saw your hand up.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Okay, so I guess two things then. First, building on your observation about a common question, how to do something. I think that actually speaks to another important thing we'll see in 20 years in all AI, which is personalization. Right. So let's say you're searching, how do I do X on the internet? Perhaps you're searching, how do I do a certain exercise to stay in shape? But maybe you broke your leg last week, so you can't, you don't have the full range of mobility you typically do. But you're going to get, generic search results for exercises for able-bodied people with full mobility, and that might not be suited to you, right? And so, kind of similarly, I think this need for personalization is going to change the kind of AI agents that we all see in 20 years. Right now, Chat GPT, for instance, people say, oh, it can write so well, better than a lot of people. I don't know. I take some issue with that. I actually have very high standards for writing, so I'm a little disappointed in the writing quality. But you can imagine right now, there's just a generic that model writing. But in 20 years from now, I'm sure I'll have a model that's customized, right, to my own personal writing style. So that if I'm using it as an assistant to do a first draft of my emails, which I would then still be in the loop to edit, that first draft would be in my style. And it would be very different than the first draft that, Monica or Ben's assistant would produce for them. And I think we'll see that kind of personalization throughout everything. The other thing that I was raising my hand for to react to earlier was around Ben and Monica's comments. Ben was mentioning, like, in the early stages of search, search engine optimization was a challenge, right? That, the search engine had to keep updating its algorithm because people tried to game the system, and that humans in the loop were important as part of that ongoing battle. And I just want to point out, that search engine optimization, it didn't get solved, right? Like, that's an ongoing battle. Even, just last week, there's a huge problem that I was reading about in the news where people would embed, in a hidden font in their articles, things like, who's going to win the Super Bowl, or what time does the Super Bowl start? Because they anticipated that would be a popular query, and then that would make their irrelevant page pop to the top of results. And similarly, I think we're never, even 20 years from now, going to have AI without humans in the loop somewhere, because different kinds of, I said crime would change, different kinds of attacks, whether, criminal or vandalism or the new version of search engine optimization, whatever that is, are going to constantly change. People are ingenious in coming up with new ways to game new systems. And there are always going to have to be people in the loop for any responsible AI deployment to rapidly respond to and adjust systems to new and ongoing kinds of attacks.
So I think, Ben, I see your hand is up. I would.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wonder, I did ask Ben.
Wait, hang on just 1 second. I just wanted to draw attention to something that that Meredith said. What she described about new kinds of crimes suggests to me a kind of information pollution, which is kind of like climate change and atmospheric pollution with greenhouse gases. The idea that we might have people criminally introducing information pollution to mess up a lot of these systems is an intriguing thought. So I just wanted to get that on the record, but please go ahead.
Yeah, data poisoning is the term people I think are beginning to use for that. It's a real concern.
Malicious actors will continue to be a central problem. And that, Vint, I just want to go back, if you can fill us into how 12 years ago or so, Google hired 3,000 people to reduce the dangers to search. And cannot Google hire 3,000 or 10,000 people now to ensure the high quality of ChatGPT and similar systems, maybe like Bard, clean up some problems?
Well, so Ben, just a point to be made here is that the amount of information that flows into the system, which feeds the search engine and also feeds a lot of these large language models, is so vast in quantity that trying to manually interact with this is impossible. I mean, we get 400 hours of video per minute uploaded into YouTube. As an example.
Not manually. I'm not saying that. I'm saying build a system.
Yes, but here's what happens. So we say, okay, what we'll do is we'll have a collection of people evaluate websites, just to take something specific. And then we will try to train an artificial machine learning system to learn what it was that they used to evaluate the quality of the website. And then we'll try to automate the website evaluation. Well, those are things that we and others have tried to do, and it does have some effect. But again, these are statistical systems, and they don't have the linkage that I think we're looking for. And I'm hoping 20 years from now, and that's the linkage to verifiable sources, factual information that is widely regarded as factual. Finding a way to bind that into the machine learning mechanisms that we use today is still, in my view, not quite within our grasp.
Well, I think, Google did this 12 years ago because it was its competitive advantage. And I think my book, Human-Centered AI, and I make the point about responsibility. And I think it's the responsibility of Google to clean up the problems.
Well, but Ben, I'm not just denying that we have a responsibility. What I am trying to say is that scale is an issue here, and trying. And so the thing I worry about when people say things like you just did is that if they don't appreciate how to operate at the scale at which these systems are generating content, or that humans are generating content, or machines are generating content, that it's non-trivial to figure out how to make that work.
No question. I'm saying that Google found a way 12 years ago at much lower scale with much weaker technology. And certainly I believe, and my devoted and wonderful friends and colleagues at Google have the capacity to do it. Just to move on to the other topic, I think some of you know my bumper sticker, which supports Meredith's point that humans in the group and computers in the loop is what we want to move to. And we want to look at the structures that build social systems and allow the kind of collaborations of Wikipedia. And maybe Google will use a kind of crowdsourced approach to deal with this, not in the immediate, but over the aggregate, over the long term. I noticed Monica Lamb said specifically, more competition is always better. And that struck me as a strong statement. And I might have said more collaboration is always better. But I think we have to understand that collaborative systems have great power for us to put to work, and not only competition that puts a negative and battle mode into place. So we want to build collaboration in a much more ambitious way.
Well, I certainly am a big fan of collaboration with people and with tools. Monica.
So when I say competition, I'm talking about the fact that today a few companies control the media, control how people consume data. And in that sense, it is a monopoly. It's not just when we say competition, I want to have more choices and more products that people can choose. Because today, if you want to be social, you have to be on Instagram, you have to be on Facebook. That's the kind of competition that I'm talking about. Is to democratize the technology. And of course, collaboration, I'm a big fan of that because that's what we do with our open source software. So what I want to say is that the reason why I got into this project in the first place is I was just appalled with the misinformation that is in social media. If you talk about YouTube, it is how they promote the content that they know they get clickbait that is causing a lot of these issues about conspiracy theory and so forth. This is not just about filtering the information. But companies like that, like the social media, they have the need to serve ads and they have to have eyeballs. But what was really scary is that there is a lot of new technology that is not available to other people, like academic people like us, that try to do something that for example, just think a little bit about what conversational agents can do. Okay, and you will have a lot of commercial uses of these conversational agents to promote even more misinformation. And, you can talk to Trump, anybody can have personal conversation with Trump and so forth. But the problem here is that you're not just keep saying that it's bad, it's bad. You have to take this technology and give it in the hands of all the people who mean to do well. There are lots of people who can have a very good conversation with anybody about climate change, about how we have to have vaccines and so forth. But the driver, the commercial driver, is such that those kinds of work is not surface. It's not easy to promote. And one of the issues here is that it's the centralization of, and the Facebook is a centralization of eyeballs, right? I mean, we brought them in because of social, and they are there, and they manipulate it with all the micro advertising, because they are very profile based. But the problem here is that we have to embrace the fact that there is new ways of reaching to people. Conversations is is going to be big, and we have to make sure that there are lots of people who have important and useful and good things, to say to people to be able to use that kind of technology. And that's why all the work we're doing is open source, because I think that we cannot possibly skip this technology, skip democratizing this technology.
So we're going to run out of time in just a few minutes. Meredith has her hand up, so let me give the microphone to you.
Sure. I think building on Monica's comments about misinformation, I think leads us to something else that's important, that both things that will and won't change 20 years from now. One thing that will change is the volume of information, whether misinformation or quality information available. I mean, that's going to exponentially change starting now, because you're not only going to have, if you think about Web 2.0, that was user-generated content. And Vint, you spoke about the scale of things like YouTube, right? People upload billions of videos a day, and those are manually created for the most part. Now think of AI-generated content in text, in multimedia, whether well-intentioned or spam. The proliferation of information is exponentially going to change. At the same time, what's not going to change are human capabilities, human attentional capabilities, the number of hours and minutes in the day. And so again, I think what we're going to have to see here is a whole new solution of tools and interfaces for helping people decide what information to attend to in this endless sea of data.
So interestingly enough, one of the biggest advances in our ability to work with information involved dealing with unstructured information. That's what the search engines and the World Wide Web and coping with unstructured data or unstructured information created a dramatic increase in our ability to discover content that we were interested in. And I'm now beginning to wonder whether structure and metadata and the like will become even more central to finding the quality information that we're looking for. And so we're back again to provenance, to sources, to indicators of quality, and other kinds of things in order to tease out from this massive amount of content that which is of value. I think that we're out of time, so let me thank Meredith and Ben and Monica for a nice feisty conversation full of interesting ideas. I'll turn this back to Greg. We'll take a break, I think, between now and our next session.